speaking of Canadian interests, this Prime Minister opposed the pipeline from Alberta to the Pacific, just like his Liberal predecessor blocked that same pipeline. If it's anything other than a public relations ploy, why won't he say on what date will construction begin on a pipeline from Alberta to the Pacific?
Canada just watched a political showdown that revealed far more than expected. Pierre Poilievre stormed into Parliament demanding a pipeline to the Pacific and accusing Prime Minister Mark Carney of being weak, slow, and pathetic. But instead of backing down, the Carney government delivered one of its sharpest counterattacks yet. Their pushback didn't just expose holes in Poilievre's argument, it also uncovered the bigger picture behind this entire fight, the way Donald Trump benefits every time Canada stays landlocked and dependent on the U.S. market. This wasn't just another loud moment in question period. It was a turning point that showed the two very different futures being offered to Canadians, one tied to American interests and another aimed at strengthening Canada's independence.
Mr. Speaker, sometimes the question reveals everything. The memorandum of understanding that we're negotiating with Alberta creates necessary conditions, but not sufficient conditions, because we believe in cooperative federalism. We believe the government of British Columbia has to agree. We believe that First Nations right holders in this country have to agree and support. All stakeholders have to back. That's one Canada.
Inside the House of Commons, Poilievre went all in. He demanded that Carney announce the exact date construction would begin on a pipeline from Alberta to the Pacific. He accused the Prime Minister of hiding behind the Premier of British Columbia, delaying major projects and preparing nothing more than a public relations stunt. He even mocked Carney by asking whether the pipeline has to be a Brookfield pipeline, taking a jab at the Prime Minister's finance background. The Carney government fired back with equal force. Cabinet ministers reminded Poilievre that under Stephen Harper's decade in office, a government Poilievre proudly served, not a single drop of Canadian oil reached a new tidewater port. They stressed that real pipelines require cooperation among Alberta, British Columbia, and First Nations, and that any project built without that cooperation is guaranteed to fail. They also pointed out something Poilievre never mentioned. The Liberal government actually expanded oil exports to the coast by purchasing and completing the Trans Mountain Expansion project. The exchange was fierce, but underneath the shouting, the real issue became clearer. The struggle isn't just political, it's geopolitical. There was one moment in Poilievre's attack that unintentionally revealed the most important truth in the debate. When he said Carney was forcing Canada to keep pumping oil at discounts to the United States, he exposed the exact situation that Washington, and especially Donald Trump, wants to maintain. For years, American refineries have depended heavily on discounted Canadian heavy crude. U.S. refinery systems are built to process Canada's oil specifically. According to data cited throughout 2025 by the U.S. Energy Information Administration, nearly 70% of American crude imports now come from Canada. That dependency gives the United States huge leverage over Canada's energy sector, and it keeps Canadian oil prices lower than global market rates. This is why every time Canada tries to diversify, Washington reacts. Throughout 2025, Reuters reported that Trump's tariffs and regulatory threats were designed to keep Canadian crude flowing south, not east or west. A pipeline to the Pacific would allow Canada to sell to Japan, South Korea, China, India, and other fast-growing markets. That pipeline would break the American monopoly. Poilievre's argument, whether he intended it or not, supports the U.S. position. Carney's strategy threatens it. That's the real fight behind the theatrics. Carney's response in Parliament wasn't defensive, it was methodical. His ministers repeated the same message. A Pacific pipeline must have Alberta's support, British Columbia's support, and First Nations support. Without that alignment, the project would face endless court challenges, protests, and regulatory failures, exactly what killed past conservative projects. This isn't delay for delay's sake. It's the only way to build a pipeline that's legally strong, socially stable, and economically worth the investment. Carney understands that Canada's future customers aren't just in the United States, they're in Asia. and 2025 confirmed this shift. Japan is searching for stable, non-Middle Eastern oil suppliers. South Korea signed a major economic and energy partnership with Canada in October. India is opening long-term crude contracts. Even China, despite intense political differences, paused its rare earth export restrictions at APEC while signaling interest in deeper energy cooperation. A Pacific pipeline is Canada's bridge to these markets. A rushed announcement won't get that pipeline built. A durable strategy might.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition doesn't seem to understand how to get a pipeline built. The Premier of Alberta does. It's working with this government to build Canada strong, Mr. Speaker.
Not a single milliliter of oil reached Tidewater under the Harper era. In the Liberal government, oil exports have increased. Oil exports to Tidewater, thanks to the purchase of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, have increased. Canada is a conventional and a renewable energy superpower, and that will continue.
The Carney government's strongest argument came from a simple fact. During the Harper years, when Poilievre was a senior minister, not one new pipeline reached the ocean. Northern Gateway collapsed in court because it failed to properly consult First Nations. Energy East was abandoned because the economics didn't add up. Keystone XL was cancelled by U.S. politics, not Canadian ones. And the only major coastal pipeline that Canada now has, the Trans Mountain expansion, exists because a Liberal government bought the project and finished it. So when Poilievre demands unimaginable speed, Canadians are right to ask why he didn't deliver anything close to that when he actually had power. Carney's approach isn't flashy, but it's realistic. It's built on legal precedent, treaty rights, and interprovincial cooperation, the very things the courts require. Under Trump's second term, the United States has slapped new tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, lumber, and auto parts. Washington is openly trying to pull supply chains back under American control. At the same time, U.S. refineries cannot function without Canadian heavy crude. Earlier this year, Reuters reported Canada was exploring new routes precisely to avoid Trump's tariff weapon. Poilievre frames British Columbia as the problem. In reality, the bigger pressure comes from the United States. A Pacific pipeline is Canada's best answer to U.S. economic bullying. Poilievre keeps pointing to the federal government's constitutional power over interprovincial pipelines, but he ignores a crucial reality. For more than 2 decades, the Supreme Court of Canada has ruled consistently that the federal government must consult and accommodate First Nations whose territories are affected. Any pipeline that ignores this is guaranteed to be struck down. Carney's approach integrates Indigenous governments from the beginning because that is the only way to build a project that can actually last. Poilievre's shortcut approach is not just unrealistic, it would repeat the mistakes that doomed past projects. This clash in Parliament wasn't really about a single project, it was about Canada's direction. The question is simple but powerful. Do we keep selling oil on America's terms, at America's price, with America holding all the leverage? Or do we build the infrastructure that lets Canada finally sell to the world and control its own future? Poilievre wants speed. Carney wants strength. Trump wants Canada to stay dependent. And now Canadians must decide which vision actually builds a stronger country. The whole world is shifting. The question is whether Canada shifts with it or keeps waiting for Washington's permission.
The federal government is hitting back at 2 big automakers. Ottawa calling it unacceptable that Stellantis and General Motors are both scaling back manufacturing in Canada, breaching its commitment. Ottawa is now trying to put pressure on them to back down by limiting the number of vehicles they can bring in from the U.S. tariff-free.
It started with a headline that sent shockwaves through North America's auto industry. Ottawa announced that it was cutting the number of American-made vehicles allowed into Canada without tariffs. Overnight, what once looked like a quiet trade exemption turned into a loud political statement. The decision came after 2 major U.S. automakers, Stellantis and General Motors, scaled back production in Canada. For years, both companies had enjoyed the privilege of importing cars from the United States tariff-free. That deal came with one condition: keep investing and building in Canada. When they failed to honor that promise, the Canadian government struck back. Ottawa's move isn't just about cars or trade figures, it's about drawing a line. In a region where the U.S. has dominated economic decisions for decades, Canada is finally saying, enough. What Trump once called an industrial revival for America has now triggered something far bigger, a political counterattack from the very ally he's been squeezing. The details of Canada's decision reveal how carefully calculated it is. Starting this month, Stellantis will lose half of its duty-free import quota, while General Motors faces a 24% reduction. These exemptions were part of Canada's response to the 25% retaliatory tariff it imposed on U.S. vehicles after Trump's trade escalation. By scaling back those privileges, Ottawa isn't just reacting, it's redefining the rules of engagement. The government's message is simple. Companies that move production south of the border will pay more to sell in Canada. Officials say this is about fairness, not punishment. Canada invested over $105 million to modernize facilities in Ontario, including Brampton and Windsor, under the condition that automakers maintained their footprint. Instead, they shifted production to Illinois and halted electric van production in Ingersoll. That violated the agreement, and the government responded with precision. The brilliance of this move lies in its restraint. There are no shouting matches, no populist threats. Instead, Ottawa is fighting back with regulation, a trade weapon that's quiet, legal, and effective. It's not a tariff war. It's a policy chess match, and this time, Washington isn't the only one holding the board.
Behind this confrontation is the unmistakable shadow of Donald Trump's America First doctrine. His second-term agenda has pushed multinational companies to relocate manufacturing to the United States through a web of tariffs and incentives. On paper, it's a triumph. Jobs are returning to America, factories reopening, the industrial belt revived. But that same policy has set off a chain reaction north of the border. By forcing automakers to choose between American and Canadian production, Trump's strategy has cornered his closest trading partner. Canada, once pressured to comply, is now rewriting the rules. Instead of accepting Washington's dominance, Ottawa has used the moment to harden its own industrial identity. The government's new approach rewards loyalty and punishes flight, a model that mirrors Trump's tactics but serves Canadian interests. What was meant to make the U.S. stronger is now giving birth to a more assertive Canada. Trump's aggressive reshoring campaign didn't just change where cars are built, it changed how Canada sees itself in the global industrial race. The irony is striking. In trying to make America great again, Trump has awakened a neighbor that refuses to stay quiet or submissive. Canada has learned to fight back using the very instruments Trump relied on: policy, pressure, and pride.
Across Ontario, where factory closures have hit hardest, the mood has shifted from anger to determination. Unions and suppliers, usually divided by labor negotiations, now speak with one voice. They want accountability. They want production to stay in Canada. Public sentiment is equally firm. A nationwide poll released this month shows that 79% of Canadians worry about the future of the auto industry. 74% believe losing it would have a devastating impact on the national economy. Most strikingly, 2/3 of respondents, 67%, say they would boycott any company that moves its operations from Canada to the United States. For many Canadians, this isn't just about cars, it's about dignity. It's about whether their country will continue to build or merely extract and import. The government's decision to restrict duty-free access resonates deeply because it feels like a defense of national identity. Factories in Brampton and Ingersoll once symbolized the strength of Canada's manufacturing core. Now they stand as a reminder of what's at stake. And for the first time in years, workers, business owners, and policymakers are united around a single idea. Canada must control its own industrial future. That unity gives Ottawa leverage. It sends a clear signal to Trump's Washington. Political bullying may work elsewhere, but not here. Canada has found its footing and is willing to fight for every job, every investment, every plant that defines its industrial heart. Ottawa's quota cuts are more than a technical policy change. They're a declaration of independence in a trade relationship long tilted toward the U.S. What began as a response to two automakers has evolved into a warning aimed straight at the White House. The message is unmistakable. If America wants to play hardball, Canada can too. Trump's trade strategy was designed to pull industry home, but it's now driving Canada to shield its economy with the same tools. Instead of folding under pressure, Ottawa has embraced its own version of industrial nationalism, disciplined, rules-based, and unapologetically firm. The impact of this decision will ripple far beyond the auto sector. It challenges the assumption that the U.S. can dictate the pace of North American production. It also marks the beginning of a new era where Canada uses trade policy not just for defense, but for power projection. As the next round of trade talks looms in Washington, the balance of leverage is changing. Canada's actions have shown that it's not the silent partner in North America anymore. It's a country ready to define its own destiny, even if that means confronting its largest trading ally.
Trump's industrial crusade promised to restore America's dominance. Instead, it has united Canadian workers, galvanized their government, and reshaped an industry once thought dependent on U.S. goodwill. The tables have turned. Ottawa is no longer asking for leniency. It's setting the terms. And in doing so, it's turned Trump's greatest economic weapon into a mirror, one that reflects his own policy back at him. In the end, what began as a trade pressure campaign may go down as the moment Canada found its industrial voice. Trump wanted to make America stronger again. What he didn't expect was to make Canada stronger too.
71% of Canadian consumers say they intend to buy fewer American products this year.
Canada is a very tough country to deal with.
It's got some staying power. When Trump calls us the 51st state as a deliberate insult, it is amplified on social media. And so he's actually keeping it top of mind. He's keeping the boycott going.
It began with a remark that shook Canadians. In February, President Trump triggered a trade war and suggested Canada might be America's 51st state. What could have been dismissed as political theater struck a nerve. By spring, surveys showed 71% of Canadians plan to reduce purchases of American goods in 2025. Economists cited by CNBC warned the boycott could slice 0.3% from U.S. GDP this year, about $90 billion in lost output. Walking into grocery stores in Ontario or Quebec, the shift is plain to see. Where displays once overflowed with U.S. corn and berries, shelves now carry Canadian flags and Made in Canada labels. What began as consumer frustration has turned into a movement of economic nationalism. The message is simple. If there is a Canadian choice, that is the choice people will make.
The pressure is most obvious in food and drink. At Vince's Market, a Toronto-based chain serving 30,000 weekly customers, managers said that during Canada's off-season, they once relied on American produce for up to 70% of their stock. Today, that share has dropped to about 30%. Apps like MapleScan help shoppers verify origin and encourage them to favor local substitutes. Losses are clear in agriculture and beverages. Canada was the United States' second-largest food export market in 2024, worth $28.4 billion. California wines once filled 30 to 40% of red wine sales in Canadian shops. That revenue, about $60,000 a week for some stores, has evaporated. Provinces imposed a 25% tariff on U.S. alcohol this March, and bottles vanished from shelves. Imports of distilled spirits from the U.S., valued at $221 million in 2024, are being replaced by supplies from France, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. American farmers and vintners who depended on cross-border sales are watching demand collapse.
The boycott is not confined to products. Travel has become another front. In 2024, 20 million Canadians visited the United States and spent $20.5 billion. This year, the flow is shrinking rapidly. Online searches for U.S. trips from Canada dropped 50% in the spring. Land crossings in March were down almost 30% year-over-year, while air travel fell 22% in June, according to CBC. For border economies, this is a crisis. Restaurants, retail outlets, and hotels in Windsor and Detroit, or Buffalo and New York State, report vanishing traffic. The U.S. Travel Association estimated America is on track to lose $12.5 billion in international visitor spending in 2025 compared with last year. Local businesses describe empty parking lots and declining revenues with no clear path to recovery.
The White House insists tariffs are making America stronger, yet for U.S. companies watching their Canadian sales disappear, the picture looks very different. While Japan and the European Union have signed new tariff frameworks and South Korea remains in talks, Canada is drifting further away. Instead of cooling tensions, Trump's rhetoric often reignites them. By repeating provocative statements and doubling down on trade barriers, he has helped keep the boycott alive. The result is a cycle of loss. American producers are squeezed, border towns are weakened, and international travelers are looking elsewhere. Even in Europe, early signs show consumers turning away from U.S. brands, suggesting the damage is not limited to North America. For Canadians, the Buy Canadian movement has become a unifying act of resistance. For Americans, it is a warning that tariffs and insults can cost dearly in jobs, sales, and reputation. Trump promised to put America first. The irony is that his approach has left America losing ground in its closest and most reliable market. The boycott that started in Canada is proving durable, and the costs are mounting day by day.